Good morning, Dave.
Morning, James. How you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. Hi, Kim,
Good.
Amy,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Oh, good morning, Mark. I got John. Great. Good morning, John. Thanks for joining. Yeah, good morning, James. Thanks for joining.
Good morning.
Yeah. Everyone's jumping on now. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Quite a few folks.
Have you seen Rich or Joy yet?
I saw,
Rich on? Okay. Good morning.
yeah, I saw Rich's name fly across.
Okay. Yeah, I'm like, I'm not as familiar with Zoom as I am with Teams and figuring out some of this stuff. But
Let's see. Yeah, there's Rich. And Jorge, thanks for joining. There's Sarah. Morning, Sarah. Thank you for joining.
Good morning.
And this is Jorge James. I'm sorry I was on mute. I didn't notice.
No worries.
good morning.
It's a multi-step process.
Yes, it is.
Morning, Jessica. Thank you for joining.
Good morning.
Let's see. Oh, there's Joy. Hi, good morning, Joy. Thanks for joining the call.
Okay. So James, you want to give it another minute or two, or should we get started?
Yeah, let's give it another minute. Let me just read
Okay.
off who I've got down so far, and if I missed anyone, please feel free to jump in and let me know you're on. So I've got Kim Williams, Amy Druell, Rich White, Jorge Rivera, Sarah Hyatt, Larry Montgomery, John Lehman, Mark Clark, Terry Cox, Jessica Barr, James O'Brien, MJ, and Dan Chaplick. Any other board members on the call?
Nick Harper's on here.
Then Van on the call.
Van.
Van's on the call?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, Van Bruno on the phone.
Anyone else?
Janice Green is on the phone.
Oh, hi, Janice. Thank you.
Hi.
Nick Harper's on the
Sue
phone.
Putnam is here.
Sue and Nick, okay. Great.
Jolenta Coleman Bush is on the phone. Not sure if you had previously caught my name.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Jolenta Coleman Bush.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hi, Jolenta. Good to see you. Sorry. All right, is Scott Forsland on the call? No. Crystal Donner? Or John Harlow?
John's on.
John's on, there he is. Thanks, John. Good to see you. All right, I think we're good to go, Kim.
All righty, great, thank you. And welcome everybody. This is our second board meeting. So I think we will go ahead and get started. And for many of you, it may be your first meeting. So we are going to start with some welcome and opening comments by Executive Summers.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you all for agreeing to participate in our workforce development efforts and envisioning here. I so much appreciate it. You know, we've been talking and thinking for the last few years on how we can really go to the next level. It's clear to me and most of us that workforce development is key to our future here in Snohomish County. We've got an amazing place. We've got amazing businesses here. But as we go forward, workforce development is really key to making sure we continue to thrive. Now, COVID has thrown a bit of a speed bump in front of us, and that's going to both create some additional challenges, but I believe also some great opportunities. You know, when there's disruption like this, it really does maybe open up some possibilities that we have in front of us and maybe hadn't thought of before. And I also want to say that we are committed at Snohomish County to eliminating as best we can institutional racism. We're going to work on that for the rest of my term, keep working. And I know equity, inclusion throughout the county is an important goal also that we need to blend into our workforce development vision. So I just, again, greatly appreciate all your efforts. I've got a beagle here that wants a walk, so he's bothering me. If you hear he's very insistent when he decides it's time to go. But just thank you so much, and to all of you, and I look forward to working with you and supporting you in every way I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Summers. And as I said, welcome everyone to the second board meeting. For many of you, it may be your first meeting with us, and we will all look forward to, at some point in, I'm not sure what the time frame will be, when we can all be in a room together. You hopefully have your packet of information, you have the agenda in front of you. It's a pretty busy agenda, so you know, between James and myself, we will do what we can to kind of keep us moving forward. But the main goal today really is for us to hear and understand about Workforce Snohomish's budget for this next year, and then to approve that. And then Emery will also be providing us an update kind of on the Workforce Snohomish and their status of the work that they're currently doing. After that, we're going to receive an update on the work from the Economic and Workforce Recovery Task Force, and that'll be from Amy Druhl, and Amy is the task force co-chair, but she's also this board's vice chair. So Amy will give us that update, and then lastly, James is going to provide us some information, and then we'll be able to discuss the future strategic planning process that we will all participate in. And he has put together a draft scope of work, so we'll review that and time for questions, etc. So I think we will go ahead and start by moving into the first action item, and I'm going to ask Rich to present the minutes. And
great. Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone has received the minutes from the May 12th meeting and has had a chance to review them. And so if there are any corrections or additions, subtractions that people would like to make and relate to the minutes, you can share those with us now?
This is Dan Chaplick. One minor correction under informational items. Just looks like just an additional number was typed in. Local workforce plan, I think, should read 2020 through 2024, and it reads 20204. So I don't know if you see that underneath.
Dan, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so with that small little minor change on the date, do I have a motion and a second to approve?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Great, thank you. Opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Kim.
Okay,
Kim,
thanks,
sorry, Kim,
Rich.
just a quick question. Who seconded the motion?
I think that was Dan.
Dan, okay. Thanks, Dan. Great.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Rich. So as I mentioned kind of in the introduction is that really our main agenda item today is the budget for Workforce Snohomish. So I'm going to ask Joy, and Joy's the interim CEO of Workforce Snohomish, and she's going to brief us on the budget and answer any questions that any one of you may have. And then following this presentation on the budget, I will be looking for a motion and approval to move the budget forward. So, Joy?
Thank you, Kim. Welcome, everyone. Can we advance slides? Great. So as per your responsibilities as a local workforce board, we're presenting our PY20 budget, which starts July 1, 2020 to June 30th is our fiscal year. And I'll go into detail of what comprises the budget, but wanted to start with an overview of our operating principles in relation to our budget and how we categorize different fund sources for which you'll be presented today. So in this presentation, you'll see funding that is allocated through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act cluster. So that is formula funds, as well as rapid response funds and other funding that comes in through a formula through the state. Local Workforce Development Board funds, these are largely grants that are attributed to the designation of the local workforce board, which Workforce Snohomish receives on your behalf and administers. A lot more on that this year. And then our nonprofit corporation or 501c3 funds are also represented. Those are grants that are not necessarily linked to a local workforce development board designation, but certainly align with the mission of Workforce Snohomish and the local board. Some of our operating principles in relation to how we examine our budget is to be a good steward of our financial resources, to maximize the investments in our workforce system partners. So as you may recall, Workforce Snohomish does contract under WIOA, is required to contract under WIOA for the delivery of services in the workforce system. Responsibly forecast increase in organizational costs, as well as, and then there's a note there on revenue expenses, but we'll talk more about that later. Next slide. Okay, here's just an overview of revenue to expenses. You'll notice we do budget to forecast to push the vast majority of our expenses or our revenue, which may not be our allocations and our funding out to be in service to the county and the workforce development system. WIOA funds, as we'll see, does currently make up a large proportion of our budget, but I'll talk a little bit more about that trajectory as we enter PY20. Next slide. So the blue column is our WIOA formula funds, and the orange on top is all other grants. This includes those that are attributed to the local workforce development board designation, as well as 501c3. As you'll see this year, the majority of our funds at present time are WIOA formula funds. with a small percentage, relatively small percentage in grants that will be changing as we move forward. Both grants that have been secured but not yet contracted and therefore not represented in this budget. I'll talk more about that, as well as hopefully some awards that are pending linked to both the local workforce board and 501c3 status. Next slide. Just a little bit of a how we categorize funding at present time. There'll be more boxes added as we proceed through the year. The Workforce Innovation Opportunity Cluster, the WIOA cluster, at present time is comprised of two different categories, one of which is formula funds and the other one is rapid response grants. Those are funds that are made available through the state through allocation dependent upon need. There'll be another box added that will be that local workforce development board grants, and those will be represented in different lines for the board moving forward, but we still do not have contracts in hand, so they're not represented in this budget today. Next slide. This is an overview of our current budget, largely driven by formula funds at present time. There are some rapid response funds that will carry into the end of November, so RR14, that was our rapid response forms. But you'll see that in PY20 revenue column that our allocations to youth, adult, and dislocated worker, as well as a comparison from PY19. So there is an established formula. Some of it's prescribed by Department of Labor. Some of it is negotiated at the state level. Workforce Snohomish County did not fare as well as other local areas this year in formula funds. Historically, we ranked towards the bottom of the 12 local workforce development areas for allocation of funds. This year, on average, there was about a 16% increase in WIOA formula funds for local areas. We had a 0.6 aggregate increase. So you'll see in a graph to follow that the formula generally pulls from historical data. So it lags economic conditions, and you'll certainly see that reflected this year. We do have some mitigating funds coming in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in our update. And yeah, I'll pause there to let everyone. Dislocated worker funds, just important to note there is a decrease there, but I believe the philosophy from Department of Labor this year is that dislocated worker funds will largely come out through competitive grants in service to the areas. So we have received a couple of those. We are just received our contract for one yesterday and has not been incorporated in this budget, but have another one pending. So I'll talk about that and our pursuit of supplemental funds to support dislocated workers in the county and across the state with other local boards. Next slide. So here's an overview again, just looking at, so prior WIA, now WIOA formula allocation revenue. As you'll see, it's been fairly consistent in the last couple years, increasing in PY19, decreasing in PY20. It's reflective largely of our past economic conditions in the county. And dislocated worker funds decreased from previous year, largely due to the increase in the availability of grants. Next slide. This is a historical look of WIOA funding. As you'll look back at the Great Recession, you'll see that, you know, PY09 was the year, and funds caught up the following year. So we're in a very similar cycle here, where funds are based on data that is historical, have a slight decrease this year, or I guess net minor increase, 0.6% overall. But it goes up and down. It's and historically it's just been trending down over the years. Okay, next slide. Oh, that's the end of my slides. Okay. You're on mute, Kim.
Oh, I sure am. Thank you.
There we go.
But I
Yeah.
thought there was one more. So how about questions for Joy regarding the budget? You can either use the chat box or take yourself off mute.
This is Janice Green. I have a question about the contract portion of the budget. What's in that contract portion?
So the contract portion is largely our subrecipients that deliver services at WorkSource. So we have a number of contracts in, so under WIOA, we do not deliver direct services. They're required to subcontract that out and go through RFP processes every 3 years. For adult dislocated worker, and then youth and business solutions as well. So those are our contracting costs, is direct delivery of services.
Do they go to,
which makes up the majority of our budget.
Do they go to smaller businesses, diverse businesses? Do you have or do they go to larger contractors to deliver those services?
Yeah, so the RFPs are open, and I might call on our service delivery director to explain as well, but current contractors include Employment Security Department, Immigrant and Refugee Services Northwest, and Housing Hope. I hope I'm not missing anyone for adult and dislocated worker, and then Res Care for youth and business solutions.
I didn't hear I didn't hear the last one.
Res Care for business solutions and youth. And Mary, can you chime in? When are our current contracts going back out to RFP? I think we're in year 2 of 3.
Sorry, had trouble unmuting. We have some that are in year 2 of 3, and that is correct. Sometimes they're on a rotating basis. So we are going to be putting out RFPs on schedule.
And the board does have a prescribed role in engaging in that process as well.
So this is Kim. So Joy, when would we then expect to understand more about our role in that and then see that material?
Yeah. Mary, when are you starting to prepare RFPs?
We would like to. We typically do that about 90 days before the end of the contract. And what we really are looking at this year is a scope of making sure that we're collaborating with the board and co-creating that RFP, because what we really would like to do is make sure that we have a more diverse pool of applicants, and that has traditionally been a problem. We do try to advertise that broadly, and we're looking for new ways to get that out and really have a whole host of competitive applicants, and that is a board viewed and board evaluated process in the past. So we anticipate that really should be the same.
And so I think that we would likely back that up further because of the new structure. So yes.
Thank you, Joy. Absolutely. It's going to take some time to co-create the RFP, make sure we've got the right elements in there, and then also do the advertising and rating, and then award, because it takes time for those subrecipients to hire, etc.
So just a clarifying question. So they expire June 30, 21?
Correct.
Okay. We have some that expire June 30, 21, and then some 2022.
Okay, so the first time the board will engage will probably be sometime at the end of this calendar year.
Correct. Yep, beginning of next calendar year. Yes.
Sure.
And I would say that there's likely some strategic components as well that could be introduced in your planning process as well.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, Janice.
For your question?
It does. Thank you. I'm very interested in seeing how that plays out and what the strategy behind it will be.
Excellent. We look forward to your input and engagement. I think Scott had a question.
Yeah, since how we orient ourselves to this work is important, I just have a question. The narrative, and this has been for those of us who've been on the Workforce Snohomish board for a while, the narrative that's been reinforced has been that we've seen reductions every year, reductions every year, reductions every year. And that was true from 2004, but I think it's actually been relatively stable for more than a half a decade now. And I'm just wondering if it might be time to stop using 2004 as the way we think about funding. Just your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I think WIOA and WIA need to be segmented out as well, Scott. So I agree that the benchmark, it has been relatively stable. I think with WIOA reauthorization coming up, that a little historical context is also important regarding our public workforce development system and the value placed or not placed on that context. So I guess it's a partial agreement with that statement in that historical context does provide for an understanding that as far as a public workforce development system and the value placed on that through funding has declined significantly from the beginning of 2 decades ago. Now, if we benchmark a decade past, then yes, relatively stable. I think our primary message will be to look at that. So the formula will be up for negotiation at the end of August. Will begin at the end of August this year. And I think looking at the formula and how Snohomish County has provisioned in other counties, how that formula works or is not working from an equity standpoint, I think will be a valuable discussion to engage in.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think the comment about how Snohomish County has fared relative to others over time is probably really important to be looking at. Yeah, thanks.
It is. It's both. So maybe we separate that slide out and then put the past decade behind us. But just wanted this board to understand that that has shifted pretty significantly over the last couple decades.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey Joy, it's Rich. On to what Scott said. If you go back to that previous slide, which I think he's referring to, my starts in 2003, 2004, and of course you had 9/11. And if you're looking at it, it takes about a year for that formula to uptick and when it relates to dollars. If you start actually in, 02, 01, 2000, I'd be curious to see whether or not though that high blip right there in 3 and 4 had to do with 9/11 and how hard the aerospace industry was hit after 9/11. So that formula that had Snohomish County high recipient of these dollars might be the anomaly that we are looking at there, as opposed to starting at the high water mark. If you push that data out beyond that, to the last another 3 years, maybe you'd see a different trend line.
Yeah, I'd be happy to pull that. I think that would be very interesting to take a look at pre 9/11, post 9/11, as because then you have 3 different economic cycles present on this chart.
Right.
Happy to follow up.
How about other questions? I always worry that someone's having difficulty getting off mute, so I'll be quiet for a minute.
I had a question. Larry Montgomery, Laborers Local 292.
Great, thank you,
Hi,
Larry.
My question is, did I already miss? I know there's a bunch of new board members, and are we going to do the introductions and get to know the new board members?
Sure, we can do that. That's great. We can do that after we've taken care of this budget, and then we can go back and we can do round for everybody. That's totally great. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any questions remaining on the budget?
One more, I guess, Joy. I know that there were some concerns about how Workforce Snohomish would be fixed on a go-forward basis. Do you want to enter into any of that discussion now, or is this really more setting baseline?
As far as I think we are stable and have absorbed and integrated into our budget. It currently lives in the contracts line, the staff for the board, and at this point are stabilized. And yes.
Cool, thank you.
That answer it, Scott?
Yep.
Okay. Other questions regarding the budget?
Yeah, Kim, this is James. Maybe just one thing to clarify to the board members, and Joy kind of alluded to this a little bit, but the staffing to support the Future Workforce Alliance board, which comprises myself and Simrit, that's actually a portion of our staff time is being paid from the WIOA funds that Joy just gave us a brief on. So those funds and the sort of agreement we are putting in place right now is essentially the mechanism that allows us in the Snohomish County office to do our work to support the board and also workforce in general in Snohomish County.
And right now, I'll say that lives in the contract line item. I'm not sure where you might see it. It's not technically a contract, so we might have to just line item it out. But right now, it is living in that contract line item. But it will not be a contractual obligation between the two entities.
Okay, thanks for adding that clarification. Any last questions? If not, I'm looking for a motion to approve.
Hi, Kim. This is Van. I make a motion to approve the budget.
Thanks, Van. Do we have a second?
Second.
Oh. Okay, was that Mark?
Yep, that was Mark. Second.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any abstentions? And any opposed? Okay, so the budget is approved. So I think, thank you, Larry, for the suggestion. Sorry, I didn't pick that up as we started the meeting, but I am gonna, maybe James, can you kind of lead us through, since I don't have the full, I thought I had a full list of board members, but I am missing a few. So I'm gonna ask you to kind of help us move through introductions. And folks, if you could just, you know, your name and if you're, you know, where you're employed, and we won't go real deep. We can do that maybe at the retreat, but
okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we'll start with you, Kim. So Kim Williams as the board chair.
Okay, yeah, okay. Kim Williams, and I'm the chief executive for Providence and Northwest Washington.
Great, thank you. And we'll go to Amy Druell.
Hi, I'm Amy Druell. I have an insurance brokerage here in Linwood, Washington.
Great, thank you, Amy. Rich White.
Hi, Rich White. I just did local government relations for the Boeing Company.
And then we'll go to Jolenta Coleman-Bush.
Hi, Jolenta Coleman-Bush, Microsoft Corporation with Microsoft Philanthropies.
Great, thank you. Scott Forsland.
Scott Forsland with the Providence Institute for a Healthier Community.
Thanks, Scott. Jorge Rivera.
Morning, everybody. This is Jorge Rivera. I'm AVP of Community Development for Molina Healthcare of Washington.
Great. Sue Putnam.
Hello, this is Sue Putnam, Mod Pizza Corporate.
Good pizza. Crystal Donner.
Good morning. I'm Crystal Donner, CEO of Petite, an engineering consulting firm.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. Janice Green.
Hi, I'm Janice Green. I'm President and CEO of Women's Business Enterprise Council Pacific.
Thanks, Janice. John Harlow.
John Harlow, CEO, General Manager for the PUD.
Great, thanks, John. Sarah Hyatt.
Hi, I'm Vice President of Hyatt Construction, civil contractor in Snohomish County.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Larry Montgomery.
Larry, are you on mute?
Yeah.
I think you might have lost him, James.
Larry Montgomery, business agent, organizer for Laborers Local 292.
Great, thanks, Larry. John Lehman.
John Lehman, business representative for the Pacific Northwest Regional Council of Carpenters.
Great, thank you, John. Mark Clark.
Yeah, Mark Clark, Executive Director for IAM Boeing Joint Programs and Labor Representative for District 751 Machinists.
Great, thanks, Mark. Terry Cox.
Hi, Terry Cox. I'm the Vice President for Workforce Development and Training at Edmonds College.
Great, thanks, Terry. Nick Harper.
Thanks, James. Nick Harper, Deputy Mayor, City of Everett.
Great, thanks, Nick. Jessica Barr.
Good morning, Jessica Barr, Employment Security Department, and I'm the North Sound Regional Director.
Thanks, Jessica. James O'Brien.
Hi, Jim O'Brien, Washington State Division of Vocational Rehabilitation.
Thanks, Jim. MJ.
Mary Jane Bravojevich, Director of Human Services for here at Snohomish County.
Thanks, MJ. Van Kuno.
Van Kuno, Executive Director of Refugee and Immigrant Services Northwest.
Great, thanks, Van. And Dan Chaplick.
Good morning, Dan Chaplick, Superintendent of the Sultan School District.
Great, thank you all. Did I miss anyone on the board? Okay. Great, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. So, Joy, we now would love to move in and just get an update on Workforce Snohomish.
Absolutely. James, I'm not sure if you did. There they are. Okay. So we have a couple updates for you. I don't want to take the credit for the designation agreement, but today James and the county and Workforce Snohomish finalized a three-party designation agreement, which articulates it's a big milestone that reflects our working relationship between the three entities. That was just sent out for final review and will essentially facilitate our work moving forward. Outlines roles and responsibilities. It is not required to be voted upon by the board, but I know that James will follow up given that we just finalized the language moments before this call. So. Workforce centers, as you know, we closed physical locations back in March. We're the first in the state to close due to COVID-19 and have fully virtualized services, but there is quite a bit of work done in a planned reopening with the premise that with our partners that is just commencing, we are looking at potentially phase 3 to align, but very cognizant of the complexities of reopening, the requirements from the state, the health department, and ensuring that we are not a vector for the spread of COVID-19. So some updates more on that. Am delighted with the virtual services that have been stood up in Snohomish County as well as statewide. It was a Herculean effort and mobilized very quickly. I think at the end of the day, despite this driving circumstances, it was a opportunity for innovation or perhaps movement into the 21st century, however you want to look at it, but that virtual services will continue and that it provides access while at the same time being cognizant that there are customers that we serve that need physical access. So more planning underway throughout the summer on reopening and provisioning for services. We do expect that we will start to see an uptick in customers in the coming month as people return to re-enter the job or seek to re-enter the job market and would be happy to update the board as we go through the summer and into the fall on that. With that said, we have applied as a state. We joined a statewide consortium to pursue additional grants to support what we anticipate will be the influx of customers, as well as respond directly to COVID-19. The first grant that was awarded, we just give you a little bit of scale, as a statewide proposal, we requested about $54 million. We were awarded $12 million as a state. Workforce Snohomish was allocated just over $1 million. The Disaster Dislocated Worker Grant is really focused on providing subsidized jobs for individuals. That means wages and benefits are paid and wraparound services provided to directly respond to COVID-19. We are required to coordinate with Snohomish County and Snohomish County Emergency Management and have, as we did within the development of our scope of work, to identify where those jobs are, where they are most needed, and then find individuals to fill those jobs. Under the limitations of the grant, the subsidized work will last about 3 months, and the intent of that is to transition people to permanent employment after they complete their subsidized position. There is a real emphasis on food and food security, especially with the drawdown of National Guard. I know that's a theme throughout the Pacific Northwest, or throughout the IPAC corridor in particular, that will continue for the foreseeable future. But more on that as we just got the contract yesterday, and we'll reflect that in an updated budget in the coming months. The Employment Recovery Dislocated Worker Grant is far broader. That was a $60 million request from the state of Washington. We were awarded $12 million in funds. We are currently negotiating on funds to local areas with all 12 local workforce development areas, Employment Security Department, Workforce Training Board, so the State Workforce Development Board, as well as DSHS is a part of that conversation. Because we didn't receive 60 million, we got 12 million. So we're back in negotiations. I would anticipate that contract, which provides robust services to dislocated workers and the support that we need, will likely come on board and fund through a subcontract at the end of August, early September. Both the dislocated worker grants, we can apply for additional funds when the funding is 70% expended. I think at some point we may look at whether or not a regional or local or some variation of that dislocated worker grant is needed, depending on volume and number of customers to be served. So I will keep you apprised of those. The dislocated worker grants are tied to our designation and to the local board. Still pending. Most of our all of our other Department of Labor grants are in fact still pending. In particular, the Support to Communities Local Workforce Development and Opioid Recovery Project, an extension of the work that has occurred in partnership with the county and Pioneer Human Services and a wide variety of other partners at the Carnegie Resource Center. This grant was submitted quite some time ago by the state and is still pending. We hope to hear soon. We got a message from Department of Labor saying soon, but don't know exactly when, but that is still pending as well. So those three grants, again, linked to the Local Workforce Development Board, and two received, one contract in hand, one still pending.
Okay, thanks, Joy. So there are a number of you on the board that are very familiar with this work, and then there are others of us that are not as familiar. So I guess I would like to open it up at this point. Do you have questions about the update that Joy's given, or any of the content around the grants or designation agreement, anything like that?
And I'd be more than happy to follow up with a one-page. I'm working on one-page overviews for the dislocated worker grants now, that the scope of work is finalized for the disaster and then employment recovery. So happy to provide that to James so that he can send that out to the board. One, so that you understand the resources that are coming into the community. Certainly are connections there for employers and workers alike. So make sure you have that information.
That would be terrific, Joy. Thank you. I know that would be helpful to me. So,
absolutely.
Joy?
I will take that follow-up.
Joy, this is Scott. It took me about 2 years to figure out the youth, adult, and dislocated worker, and getting that part oriented really helped a lot. I wonder if even now it'd be worth just taking a couple of minutes to set that framework up a little. You've started already, but.
Yeah, so the difference between, I probably should defer, but I'm going to take a run at it and allow Mary to correct me. So dislocated worker grants are in fact individuals that have been displaced, laid off. That includes standby as well as permanent layoffs. And I'll pause, see if Mary wants to correct me. Adult, or Jessica, or the many other experts on the call. And then adult are generally long-term unemployed, but there are some additional populations that are categorized under adult funding, refugees and asylees. And are there others, Mary, that I should be adding? Van, Jessica?
Yeah, there are. It does typically look at long-term unemployed and those individuals in a low income or dislocated from the workforce system for a long time. But I think you got it right, Joy. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Janice.
And then youth are ages 16 to 24.
Janice?
So we have, we say youth, but young adults.
Okay, I just had a question about that. I just want to know if you've had any feedback since you have been closed physically. Any feedback on the ability of some of the lower income people to do things virtually, service-wise, or how does that work for them? Has there been any feedback, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I think the short answer is we are accessible via phone and online, but we certainly know that both pose challenges. We have not collected feedback or received feedback. I know we have, Mary, if you want to chime in, or Van or Jessica, but with the connection sites closed, which are largely libraries and other organizations out in the community, it is of high concern. The Employment Recovery Grant did include, of course, everything's being negotiated, but would provide for, and the disaster to some extent as well, support for individuals and their access to technology. So there is a grant that's anticipated to support broadband access, but the hardware, software, as well as digital literacy are real concerns. Some of that can be provisioned under dislocated worker grants, but I think community feedback by and large, how we capture that as a system, how we capture that as WorkSource across all partners. So we have a small portion relative of WorkSource writ large and aggregating that feedback, but I think access is a top concern, and how we do that, how we reopen to provide access safely, whether it be through connection sites or through our one-stop centers or a combination thereof. Tremendous concern across the state.
And Joy, do you see the question from MJ in the chat box? Have we heard about the HVRP renewal?
So that is the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Project. Okay. It expires today. We have not heard it is also pending.
Okay. Joy, thank you so much. Really informative. Very much appreciate it.
Of course.
So we're going to move in the agenda and get an update, a report out on the Economic and Workforce Recovery Task Force. Amy.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. First of all, there's going to be a lot of information I'll be relaying to you that we've gathered from local businesses and leaders in the community. So I'm going to be reading off my notes, so I apologize for not being able to keep eye contact with everybody. I also apologize because the house next to me is having a roof repaired. So if outside noise starts to happen, please chat and I will try to get into a different room here. Okay, so for those of you that are new, or this is your first call with us, the Economic and Workforce Recovery Task Force was established by Snohomish County Executive Summers with Council Chair Nate Nearing to understand the impacts of COVID-19 to Snohomish County employers and its employees. We did preliminary findings. They're going to be reflected in this report. I'm going to go through this report for everybody. To support the task force, advisory groups were established in each county council district and led by their respective council members. Advisory group members included representatives from local businesses, labor, tribes, chambers and downtown associations, educational leaders, and local government officials. Each advisory group submitted their findings and recommendations to the task force. In addition, a business needs assessment was distributed throughout the county to help better understand what our businesses needed, and that was online, and we did actually get a very good response and a lot of traction on that. So these following slides are going to summarize our findings and the strategies that were developed to support recovery. So this first slide you see, I'd like to go over. So while the state of Washington is responsible for reopening the economy through the Safe Start program, we found that businesses will need training and support for PPE and health and safety guidelines to keep employees and customers safe. School childcare and after-school reopening and educational attainment were raised repeatedly during the advisory group meetings. Many saw this as the critical issue for the county and the state because of its critical role for the near-term recovery, long-term economic equity, and its importance for workforce development. Business will continue to need support during recovery. Advisory group members discussed developing and implementing marketing plans to support downtown and tourism recovery, and using public spaces more creatively to support social distancing for restaurant reopening. The task force and advisory groups also recognize that some of the county's most vulnerable populations have been the most adversely and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Persistent problems such as homelessness, food insecurity, and access to health care have been further magnified by this pandemic. Recovery must include equity and inclusion strategies to ensure disproportionately impacted communities are supported with programs and resources to help them recover. Uncertainty was a common theme during the task force and advisory groups' work. Significant uncertainty exists about when reopening will occur, what it will look like, how successful it will initially be, and how quickly the local economy can return to a pre-crisis level. Recovery implementation and resiliency planning should consider measures to help prepare the community for potential future closures. Leaders from both the public and private sectors are well positioned to assist businesses across all sectors by developing and sharing innovative ideas, strategies, and other potential resources that local businesses could utilize for their own purposes. Next slide, Smrit, please. So this is the business needs assessment findings. It highlighted the tremendous impact the pandemic has had on our local business community. As we have all seen or read in the news, business and entertainment, hospitality, and retail have been hit so hard, and many losing much or all of their revenue. So on this graph, and I know we had in our report, but these are what our findings were from the business needs assessment. Next slide, please. So some more findings. Most local businesses have had to lay off or furlough some employees, but over 1/3 of those businesses surveyed have had to lay off most of their employees. Next slide, please. So a common theme of the advisory group meetings was the need to build confidence among businesses, employees, and also to the consumers to support a new normal business type environment. Businesses are making safety a priority for their employers and their customers. Businesses also recognize that reopening will be gradual and will most likely start with reduced hours, reduced staff, and less customers. Some businesses are even contemplating changing their business plan to become a new reality. Next slide, please. Thanks, Simrit. Sorry, I said Simrit and my Siri phone just went off. Apologize. As businesses begin to reopen, their needs are focused on confidence building measures for their employees and customers. Training our staff about how to use PPE and keeping their place of business clean was top of mind. So too was the need for customers to also support keeping their staff and place of business safe to mitigate the spread of the virus. Next slide, please. So here's the important piece, because strategy implementation will require a broad partner effort throughout the county and the region. Each of the partners listed, along with many others, will need to be brought together for recovery to be effective. So whether it's local, state, federal, we all need to be coming together and working together to make this successful. Next slide, please. I apologize, there's a lot of findings from this task force. So for the task force, strategy recommendations fell into 3 main categories. The first was response. These strategies are designed to help stabilize a business and its employees. Examples of this include grant programs the county and Workforce Snohomish implemented to support aerospace business and local small businesses. The second recommendation is recovery. Strategies are designed to help businesses and workers as the economy restarts under the state's Safe Start program. Examples include a program to buy bulk PPE equipment for local businesses, PPE training for employees to build confidence, and worker retraining programs. The third recommendation is resiliency. We need to prepare for the unexpected. So preparing for the unexpected was a strong finding on the task force and advisory groups. These strategies are designed to mitigate against future shutdowns and take advantage of new opportunities. Examples include building out a robust broadband infrastructure throughout the county, enhancing the resiliency of the food supply chain, and working with companies to recruit their suppliers to the county and region for job opportunities. So our next steps. A committee of the task force will be formed to rank the strategies based on a set of criteria that include existing financial resources. Implementation will be coordinated by the county's Office of Economic Recovery and Resiliency. Going forward, the task force will work closely with the Future Workforce Alliance strategic plan development. This coordination will allow us to have a deeper understanding of the workforce and economic development needs of the county, so we can develop strategies that are impactful and support economic opportunity and prosperity for everyone in Snohomish County. I know that was a lot. The task force has been very, very busy. My summary, a few things that I want to say is that the resiliency piece is so important. Our businesses are very worried about another shutdown, and the childcare piece is a struggle right now for employers and employees. So that is all that I have for the update on the task force. I think James will go into a little bit now about the strategic plan and how we can implement that and kind of work together on that.
Thanks,
Yep.
Amy. You're right. That was pretty action-packed. So thanks. Great work.
Yeah, maybe if I could just say too, I'd like
Yep.
to thank Amy, who's one of the co-chairs, and also Ray Stephenson, who's the other co-chair, and of course Nate and others for really leading and guiding this effort, because it was a tremendous amount of work that really the task force and advisory groups did. Sarit and I were on pretty much every call with the advisory groups, and it was very, very interesting to hear what's happening across the county, and as Amy said, what's really kind of top of mind to many main businesses.
Any comments or questions from members of the board before we move to James's report?
Yeah, this is Terry. Just a quick question about, did you hear many businesses talking about shifting their model or shifting to a new basis for their business? Just interested what you might have heard about that.
Yeah, so we did hear some businesses who are redoing their business plan to a certain extent, and I think that they're unsure. Depending upon what kind of business they're in, it's hard to budget right now, especially if you're in the tourism type field. And so there are a lot of businesses who are trying to shift what they're doing and preparing that if the shutdown is worse than what we went through or are going through right now, that they will fundamentally have to change their business plan going forward.
Thank you. James?
Great, thank you, Kim. And Terry, just as a follow-up, I remember when I was talking with Janice about some of the findings from the task force. I remember Janice mentioning that she had been talking with some small businesses. I think they're located in Bellevue, women-owned businesses, and they're actually looking at closing down their offices and just moving to a work-at-home environment. So that was really kind of interesting. Great. Simrit, next slide, please. And one more. Great, thanks. And so, just as some context here for the board, the real reason why we were brought together was really sort of, as Dave mentioned at the introduction, was to really put in place a gold standard for workforce development in Snohomish County, and really one that provides opportunity for local businesses and workers throughout the county, and most importantly, really supports that broad-based opportunity and economic growth. So really making sure that everyone has access to not only training, but also to careers that they can grow into and continue to become really sort of as what we call kind of lifelong learners, and either grow within the company or change career paths and work with another company, or potentially even start their own. So it's really meant to really put in place a very robust and really dynamic workforce system to really support workers long term. So basically, sort of I think kind of the fun part of all this is we get to go through a strategic planning process to really better understand, what does the county need, what do businesses need, what do workers need, and really create that strategic alignment between the needs of businesses and workers, and then what organizations such as Workforce Snohomish, local universities and colleges, how can we align all of these resources so they all are essentially rowing in the same direction and making it really, really useful for both the businesses and workers who need those types of support. So really kind of the goals, the goals of the strategic plan are really essentially the goals of the Future Workforce Alliance, which is, again, to create that better strategic alignment, and really importantly, use data-driven information, to better understand how our industries are doing, how are they growing, and what are some of the employment pathways for people to get the skills they need to become part of the workforce. And then also, very early on, what are some of the workforce strategies that we can begin implementing in the K through 12 system? In other words, preparing, again, students not only for careers, but also for lifelong learning as well. And then how can we institutionalize and empower, the diverse elements of our workforce system to develop these robust partnerships and really cross-system resources, and really look at how we can invest more holistically into workforce development in the county. So next slide, please. So as part of your packet, we sent out a draft scope of work, and I was kind of hoping, in the time, maybe the next 10 or 15 minutes we have here, kind of talking through each of these different phases and seeing if there's other things we should be adding, things we've missed, maybe things we don't need to look at, and really kind of, put in place a good scope of work that we can then begin to shop out to consultants to potentially help us with this work. And also to that, really kind of understand, what do we need to do to really make this possible. And as Amy alluded to when she was talking about the task force, really kind of one of the goals here is begin to marry essentially the work of the task force with the work of the Future Workforce Alliance. As you know, Amy is the vice chair of the board here, but as she said, she's also the co-chair of the task force as well. So there's already that synergy between the two groups and their work that we have in place. And so now it's just a way to, I guess, more formalize that into a system where the task force really has that sort of on the ground purview and look of what's going on in the county and local communities, and then also putting in place the systems so that information feeds up to the board so we have a better understanding of what's happening throughout the county. So within the scope of work, the proposal really for phase one is really that research and analysis. So understanding where are some of the barriers to opportunity that workers face, undertaking an asset inventory or environmental scan of all the workforce programs that we have in place. So not only just from Workforce Snohomish, but local colleges and universities, other wraparound service providers as well, kind of understanding, holistically what's in place and what are the services out there that people can tap into. What are some of the industry trends? So in other words, what industries are growing, which ones are stagnating, which ones are declining. I think that will help us understand what are some of the high demand occupations going forward, so we can kind of align training to fill those needs. Again, education and training, what's going on at universities and colleges, how can they help us align with the needs of businesses? And then also what we call board and partner interviews. So I think it's important for the consultant, once we bring them on board, is to have one-on-one interviews with all the board members to really get a deeper understanding of some of the issues you're facing, from where you sit, either in business or labor or education. And then also talk with some of our partners as well, such as Joy at Workforce Snohomish and others, to really kind of understand what they're working on and how they're supporting workforce. And then phase 2, the idea would be to have a board facilitated discussion to both, articulate strategies and goal settings. So in other words, we can look at developing, some short, mid, and long-term goals for the board, and really develop the strategies that are based on what we found in the research and analysis phase, or phase 1, to really understand how they can help us meet our defined goals. And then what I think is really important is really understanding how can we understand whether or not we're reaching our goals, being successful. So what measurements and metrics do we need to have in place as well? And then finally, phase 3 would be really sort of putting this all together into both an action and implementation plan. So in other words, what are the strategies we need to do, but more importantly, how do we implement them? What are some of the key partners that can support the implementation? And then what are some of the funds that we can identify, either at the federal level, state level, or potentially even private foundations that can help us meet our goals? And then finally, what are the outcome and goal and objective metrics that we can put in place to understand how we're tracking on those goals and whether or not we're being successful, and potentially if we need to pivot and really kind of look at a different way of doing things. So broadly, that's what the scope of work currently has within it. So I look forward to any feedback you have. In terms of how we're looking to fund this plan, I have been in conversations with the Economic Development Administration. And as part of their CARES Act, they do fund workforce development strategies. So we're in the process right now of applying for an EDA grant to fund this. So that should be quite helpful. The other thing that's quite helpful with the EDA grant as well is they've lowered their matching requirement down to 20%. So that will be a big help too. So we can definitely leverage the county's funds for greater impact for this grant. So that's, again, sort of a high-level overview of the scope of work, and you have the full scope in your packet. So if you have any questions or comments, I look forward to discussing that now. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Questions, comments for James?
Well, this is Scott. James, thank you. And a handful of us served on a strategic planning committee of Workforce Snohomish.
Scott, your audio is kind of coming and going.
Oh, is this any better?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll try to talk with my ear to the phone here. What I'm just interested in is also seeing in this how we will be heightening a focus on how Snohomish County is a part of a larger ecosystem. That in the research and analysis phase, that we're taking a close look and sharing some of the missions and key competencies and assets, and some of the success measures for organizations that are the part of the bigger nest we're operating in, both the state level, also the Seattle Puget Sound MSA, as well as locally. And then there was some work that MJ did a couple years ago that I thought was wonderful, and that was to stick a pin in the idea that or pin to the wall the idea that we want to be paying attention both to economic assets, but also human capital, and recognizing that's a long-term need. So those are just two thoughts that popped to mind as I looked at this.
Thanks, Scott.
If you don't have any comments right now, feel free to email some thoughts you have to us as well, and I can incorporate that into the scope of work. Really, what I'd like to do is, once I get everyone's input into it, I'll resend it back out to the board and see how it looks, and if you have any additional comments or edits, I can send them back to us at that time.
Thank you. Kind of on the next steps, you will see that on this last slide, you want to move forward one more. We do have 2 board meetings that are scheduled, October and December, but we do need to identify, and we have not yet identified, a date for a strategic planning session. And that you should kind of look for some inquiries about that, because we'd like to have that session sometime in the fall. So know that you will hear more about that, and from us, knowing that our board meeting is October 7th, the strategic planning session may happen before that board meeting. Right, James? Yeah, okay. He's nodding his head. So, all right. Any questions about those upcoming dates or the strategic planning session? So I would at this point like to open it up. Are there any comments from the public?
Simri, did we receive any comments either via email or phone or online here?
We have not.
No, okay.
All righty then. So I guess at this point then, I just ask if there are any final comments from any members of the board or anyone else on the call, because we have a lot of staff, I think, on the call as well. So thank you, everybody, for your attendance. We had 100% participation by the board today, which is terrific. Like I said, at some point, I think many of us are on a bit of a learning journey here. And I personally will be really excited to go through the strategic planning process, because I'll feel like I have some a little stronger foundation. So please let us know your comments. Thank you. And let's see. Joy just popped something into the chat box. Both Everett and Edmonds Community College are sub-recipients for youth at WorkSource. So kind of on that, I think that was a question Janice had asked. So thank you, Joy. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend and wear your masks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very happy 4th of July.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kim.